This is a PowerPoint on Titans. Starting, of course, with Death Knight and the Primus. The Primus is pretty ubiquitous to Death Knight. As far as I know, this card is run in almost every deck in Standard, but of course, it's run in the only playable Death Knight deck in Wild, which is Even Death Knight. You can play it in Rainbow Death Knight and Wild as well, but that deck is unplayable. The Primus is incredibly powerful. You can steal health, you can deal damage, you can summon a board. It's very strong, and I would be surprised if this card ever falls out of usage for Death Knight in Standard while it's still around. Of course, it's eventually going to fall out of favor in Wild. It's just going to become too slow, an 8-mana card, but that's just the nature of Wild and cards like Titans. Eventually, most of them are going to fall out of favor just because they're way too slow and they're just big, beefy minions that do a lot of stuff. Then for Demon Hunter, you have Argus, the Emerald Star. I don't get what's up with this card. I say it's a bad card. Standard players try and tell me it's a great card. I can't ever find any list that it's playable in Standard. It's completely unplayable in Wild, and I just don't really get it. Every Demon Hunter player I talk to is like, yeah, this card's terrible. And then for some reason, whenever I say that on Twitter, it's people are like, oh, it's so good, it's so good. And then they never post like decks that prove that it's good. I'm just completely baffled about this card because I'll admit, most of my Standard knowledge comes from what other people are telling me about Standard, good Standard players for the most part, but I cannot get a check on this card. I don't know what the fuck is up with it. I know it's terrible in Wild because it just doesn't really do anything. The discount doesn't matter when you have anything else in the entire game that can discount in Demon Hunter, and I don't get it. I'm personally very confused by this card. It just doesn't make any sense. Then in Druid, you have Eonar, the Lifebinder. Okay, this is the best Titan. It just is, especially after nerfs to the one we'll get to. But this is the best Titan in both formats, I would say. Of course, it has gotten another card nerfed in Shadow Reflection. It had an interaction where you would just you would get Eonar out through ramp, and then you'd then you'd refresh your mana, Shadow Reflection, refresh your mana, all that kind of stuff. You do make a gigantic board, you draw a million cards, you heal to full, and then you'd have a huge board of 5/5s and your two other Eonars. You do a lot of degenerate things. Of course, in Wild, the reason it's so good is because of the Aviana Kun combo, but that was replaced with the Aviana Eonar combo. Once Aviana was reverted to 9 mana from 10, that combo is very good in Showdown and Badlands, especially. Like, we got to see the real power level of, Reno, Druid, Reno, Dragon, whatever kind of Astalor spam Druid you were playing, and Eonar really fit well into that deck. Then you have Agramar the Avenger. This was at one point one of the best cards in Hunter, especially last year. But as cards come out, Whizbangs really remade the kind of Hunter meta with a lot of secrets, very powerful secret cards coming out. Agramar doesn't really make sense anymore because his whole value is that he gives you an incredibly powerful weapon, but if you have a weapon guaranteed from your bargain bin, it doesn't really make any sense. It's very unfortunate that Agramar is incredibly washed, but he was easily one of the best Titans, or easily one of the best, probably second best Titan at one point behind Eonar, but it does say a lot. And then, in Standard, it's pretty good. It's nothing crazy. It's not, a super top level Hunter card in Standard like it was in Wild, but that's mainly just because of what it did for Standard, for Wild. It packaged so many great things that the class didn't really have access to, where in Standard, card draw doesn't matter as much, that Agramar's card draw didn't really make him super crazy, or the damage, or all these things, because Standard is so much slower. Then for Norgannon is so weird for Mage, because Mage spent 3 or 4 years just having absolutely no direction at all of where the cards are going. It's just a bunch of random bullshit or parasitic archetypes that are only around for one expansion and have nothing to benefit them. So Norgannon could be incredibly powerful if Reno Mage was given a lot of support because of its universal all cards cost 1, 2, or 3 more effect, which is very, very powerful. On top of the fact that, if you can make it live for 1 turn, sometimes you can deal 10 damage or 20 damage. If you make it live for 2 turns, getting 2 random secrets isn't the worst thing ever. 1 random secret is pretty bad, and then 3 random secrets, it's never worth it. So that is a bit awkward. But 1, 2, or 3 cost more for cards from your opponent, like Ubiquitous, is so powerful. Norgannon would be pretty good in, I'd say, almost any other class other than Mage. It's just Mage has this issue where the last few years, they just gave it fucking nothing. mages receive absolutely fucking nothing that can make a slower mage deck playable, so Norgon completely suffers from that. The card itself isn't bad, mage just sucks. Then you have Amethyst the Peacekeeper. This card is actually quite strong in Wild. You run it in Reno Paladin as, a great way to draw, buff your board, can, make your opponent's board weaker, all these things. But the real kicker for this card was its usage in Odd Paladin. This card, made Odd Paladin go from pretty much unplayable to actually quite strong again. Now, I'm not saying Odd Paladin is a great deck. It was kind of a culmination of a lot of cards that came out in the last 3 expansions that would have made Odd Paladin good again, but then they all got nerfed because Blizzard had an aneurysm and put Charge back in Standard, and I don't know why they did that, but I couldn't tell you. Buffing your board in Paladin when you have a restricted deck makes Amethyst incredibly powerful because it's a tutorable card due to it having 1 attack, so you can draw it. It gives you card draw itself. It's such a uniquely powerful card because it can do so many things for Paladin, and it loves every single one of those things. Plus, the fact that you can't have your board cleared as easily with Amethyst is so invaluable for wide boards such as Odd Paladin. Then, for Priest, you have Aman'Thul. This card is pretty great for any kind of slow Priest. Of course, it's amazing in Standard because value generation is significantly better in Standard, but in Wild, being able to either build a board from Amethyst or clear minions, especially Death Rattle minions, is incredibly valuable. Aman'Thul is just ultra valuable for Wild. It's probably, actually being played, it's probably one of the best legendaries in Reno Priest, in my opinion, because although it doesn't win you the game like Raza's and Reno, it just provides so many things that the deck doesn't have. Big stat bombs, easy removal, and healing, because it gives you the lifesteal 6-drop that the deck doesn't have access to. And there are a lot of games where you just want to get as many Aman'Thuls as possible through your copying spells or your raised deads or things like that. And that's the way you win the game, is just Aman'Thul greed. And he's great for that. For Rogue, Voltron, I'm not too sure how this card is. Similar to Argus, on the opposite end of the spectrum. This card is terrible in Wild, mainly because of the hyper-draw nature of Rogue. A card like Voltron just can't really do anything, even though on paper it's not the worst card ever. Again, if this were another class, it would be a pretty decent card. But I can't tell you if this card is good or bad in Standard, because every once in a while I'll see a crazy Standard list that is doing very well that runs this card, but then I'll see Jay Alex cry on Twitter that it's the worst card ever printed, and I literally can't tell you if it's a good card or not for Standard, because if Jay Alex is spending multiple days out of his fucking week to cry about this card being terrible, it must be bad, right? There's no way that this guy is going out of his way to cry about this card if it's good, right? That's my thought process. But I don't know. I'll just see some crazy fucking lists about people hitting super high rank in Standard, running Voltron and other mech cards in their deck. So I just don't know. I could not tell you where this card stands in Standard. But in Wild, it's fucking terrible. Then, for Shaman, you have Golganeth the Thunderer. This card is incredible in Wild. It's great in both Even and Shutter Shaman. It gives you everything you want. Drawing Overload cards can be either defensive or offensive with cards like Crackle or Baking Soda Volcano. It heals you. It deals damage to the board. It deals damage phase. It can kill an 8/8 super efficiently. It, of course, draws you cards. It gives you it gives you mana cheat. It does everything. This is one of the best Titans. I'd say currently it's either the second or third best Titan. It depends on where you place Aman'Thul as second or third best. But, Enar is still the best. So it doesn't really make much of a difference. But, yeah, Golganeth, great card, is beloved by a lot of Shaman players especially. And you can run this card in Big Shaman. It's not the worst thing ever, but it is recommended against. But that is another use case for this card. Then, for Warlock, you have Sargeras. So on release, Sargeras was incredibly
powerful. It got Symphony of Sins nerfed. Even after Symphony had already been buffed, because you would tutor it and you could get it out on turn 4 or 5 or 6, sorry. And it was incredibly powerful. And then Reno Lone Ranger came out, And Sargeras is completely and utterly hard countered by Reno Lone Ranger. The idea behind Sargeras is that you summon the portal and then you'll get infinite value of your 3/2s or your 3/4s if you chose that buff option. That ability from Sargeras. You have the portal, it keeps going. It can't be removed by anything except Reno Lone Ranger. This is a 9-mana card that you can't really cheat out, because if you try and cheat it out the same way as other big minions, you don't get the battle cry, so its effects are completely useless. And it's just completely hard countered by one of the best cards ever printed in Reno Lone Ranger. I don't understand what the fucking thought process of this was, because it makes absolutely no sense, right? That you print this ultra powerful legendary for Warlock, trying to get a control Warlock back online after it's been pretty terrible for years, and then you just say fuck it and you print Reno Lone Ranger and it completely makes the card useless. Like, I just don't get it. It makes absolutely no sense, and like, it feels like it's intentional, because why the fuck else would they do it? And like, people have wanted Reno Lone Ranger changed for so long, and they still haven't done it. It just doesn't make any sense. Then you have Khazgaroth and Warrior. This card's pretty bad. I mean, like, it sees a tiny bit of play in Standard, if I remember correctly, but that's also because, like, Reno Warrior just needs 30 cards. I don't think this card would make the cut in any non-Reno Warrior deck in Standard. It barely made the cut in Titans, even Warrior, but eventually was cut because it was terrible. And then once, Showdown of the Badlands came along, it's just completely unplayable. This card is it's just so bad. It doesn't really do anything useful. It kills maybe 1 or 2 minions. It maybe draws you a weapon, and it's just not that great. It's just pretty useless. I don't know. Like, every Warrior player I've talked to feels like this card just, like, sucks. And, like, maybe if it was 5 mana, it would be better, but I'm not too sure what the point of this card was. It just doesn't really do much of anything. Yeah, it kind of fights for board, and kind of draws you a weapon, and kind of heals you, but it kind of also doesn't do anything very well. It does a lot of things, but doesn't do any of them well. It's not like a Swiss Army knife tool like your Agrimar or your Aman'Thul, where they're really good at the things it does. It's just kind of okay at best at the things it does. Yogg Saron Unleashed. When this card released, it was 15 mana and said it costs 1 less for each spell you've played this game. It did not have, after this, use an ability, cast 2 spells, and it was the best card ever printed. It made Standard a 1-deck format. It made Wild a 2-deck format. This is the most powerful card ever printed. No card has ever warped both formats as hard as Yogg Saron Unleashed. No card ever will again warp both formats as much as Yogg Saron Unleashed. Even cards like Chamber of the Vasidius, which had a 90% win rate in your mulligan, did not warp Wild as much as Yogg Saron Unleashed. This is the best card ever printed. And yeah, that's going to be it from me. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what your favorite Titan is. Tell me your least favorite Titan is. Did I miss anything about these Titans? Have you ever seen a fucking Argus deck and Demon Hunter? Do you know if Jay Alexander is crying for no reason like he always does? Let me know down below. I genuinely couldn't tell you for those 2 cards, but I can tell you for the rest. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Shadows are rising again, darker than they've ever been.